right, everyone, let's go ahead and begin. Thank you all for joining this afternoon. We're excited to have you here. This is our third program out of 5 in a series for Countdown to College and for education professionals. Today's session is specifically on residency determination service and how it might affect Countdown to College and college admissions as it relates to college application week as well. Just a few notes before we begin, please remain muted. We have a good number of folks joining this afternoon. The program is being recorded and it will be available within the next week. On the CFNC YouTube page, we are going to have a special playlist that just has the 5 programs from this week for Countdown to College Education Professionals Week, and it'll be on there within a week. And please also expect in about 24 hours, you will get an email with your CEU information as a follow-up to this program today. If you have any questions as we go through the program, feel free to shoot them over in the questions pane that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. That's where I see mine. And you should also have a copy of this presentation in the handout section also that you should see there. So we have a good number of folks on today to present you with information, but also to answer your questions. So feel free to send them over at any time and we'll try and work through them as we can. Today's speakers, we're going to begin with Gene Ritter. Gene is the Residency Program Manager with the North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority. He's worked with RDS since its creation, and he's kind of the RDS guru, and he knows pretty much everything about it. And so he's going to provide you all with some information. If you have any questions as we go through, like I said, feel free to shoot them over. And then when he's finished, we'll have Dr. Juanes Ramirez. He is with the CFNC. He's one of 2 of our statewide Spanish service representatives, and he's going to provide you with a little bit of information on immigrant families or undocumented students, undocumented parents, and some information there. And we can also help answer some questions you may have. And then I'm April Cleary. I'm the CFNC Regional and Community Services Manager. I've been with CFNC for about 15 years, and I work with our outreach team, which is made up of Juanes and his counterpart, Juana, as well as our 7 regional representatives, some of who are on today to help answer questions. And so let's talk a little bit about the agenda. We will begin with RDS information and how it might relate to Countdown to College. We'll move into Spanish services, and we'll continue to take questions at the end of the program. So again, thank you for being here today, and I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Gene, who's going to do the bulk of the presentation today. Thank you.
So good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who have been around for a little while, some of this may be review. I am going to talk about some recent changes that came out of the legislature this year. So we'll get to some changes, but some of it may be review for you, but for new folks, you know, we've got, I'm going to try to give you a good overview. I'm going to try to really highlight the issues that would come up for you and the population you're serving and working with, and what we see at the RDS side. And then, as I said, we're going to have plenty of time for questions as we go on. Similarly, pretty much every state has something similar where there's certain criteria to get that subsidized rate for in-state. You all are working with folks that are here currently, but keep in mind that RDS also processes a lot of determinations for students living in other states who want to come here, let's say, to go to a university. So we serve a lot of people in different capacities, different settings. But North Carolina is fortunate in having some of the lowest tuition rates. Last time I checked, like the community college tuition rate was like the 3rd lowest in the country. So a lot of people are trying to get here, was the concern of the legislature, and try to find a way sometimes to squeeze in and get that subsidized rate. So in 2013, the North Carolina legislature directed that one central service provide this, and that was for a number of reasons. Part of it was there were some folks in the legislature that had a son or daughter applying to 3 or 4 institutions, and they said their experience was very different. Sometimes it was overkill of all the documents they had to send, and they were getting different determinations. The laws really didn't change. There have been minor tweaks every year, and it usually has to do with exceptions, but the basic law of residency has been on the books going back to the 1970s in terms of the basic requirements. So you're going to hear several organizations and whatnot. Just to clarify, so Residency Determination Services is managed by College Foundation under a contract and works collaboratively with CFNC as part of our efforts to help students apply for and attend college. The legislative authority falls to SEA, the State Education Assistance Authority, which I work for under the umbrella of the UNC system, but it's the organization that provides the technical guidance, the guidebook, the support, and it interprets policy and would handle final level of appeals. So different players all working together. Sorry, y'all. Okay. So what's required? So legally, a residency determination is required anytime a student wants to be considered for in-state tuition or any state grants. Personally, I think you should try to encourage students to do this as one of their first steps. It's required by most colleges and universities before they'll, or as part of the acceptance of an application. Some of them will allow you to apply, but then you send it in later. But there's some disadvantages to that. So the community colleges, for example, they decided up front you must have that number. They won't take the application until you have it. UNC's, at first, most of them didn't. More of them are starting to require. But those that don't, they will let you apply, but you're going to default to be an out-of-state resident. And the disadvantage for that for your students is most of the UNCs use that same determination to determine whether you go in that pile of in-state admissions or out-of-state, because there's a quota for out-of-state. So the earlier the student completes it, the better it is for them in terms of the admission criteria as well. Private independent, there's not a different tuition rate, so of course it's not required up front. It's only if it's someone who's a North Carolina resident seeking state grants, state aid. I've been asked to implore and plead, don't have students complete RDS before their senior year. What happens is it has a time limit to it. And those limits were set after consulting with colleges and universities that, you know, someone who knows, for example, the family's moving might try to do it in their second or third year of high school. They want something fairly fresh. So generally determinations are good 15 months, but what happens is they'll expire. If they do this like in their junior year, it's going to expire before they enroll. Maybe you would hit the admissions process, it was still valid, but then come enrollment time, it's going to block them, they have a problem, and then everyone gets frustrated. So not before their senior year. If they do that in their senior year, even if they defer a semester, they'd be okay. As I say, a lot of campuses use it for their admissions decisions as well. So my advice is have your students do this up front and not postpone it. Okay. Sorry, y'all, there's a lag in this. Okay. So some basics in law is, the law says the person must be domiciled here. It must be their primary permanent home. We have people that, for example, have a vacation home, a secondary home at the beach, in the mountains. That doesn't count. It has to be your primary permanent residence for at least 12 months. And again, this is pretty similar in other states. You know, it's, you don't show up today saying, I'm here physically now, so I get in-state tuition. We have a lot of our students in the four-year universities trying to make that argument. It's no, you just arrive. So, but even just merely being present here, if it's not your permanent home, then it would not be eligible. The other thing that North Carolina statute is very specific about, it says that for students who have a living parent or guardian, that is considered by law that de facto, they looked at prima facie evidence that unless you prove otherwise, you're going to be domiciled wherever they are. So if your parents live in Virginia, unless you have, and there's a lot of provisions we're going to talk about. There are some exceptions. You've been living long-term with a grandmother or whatever, yes, but this is trying to get the ones who just show up today saying I'm really independent, and they're not. The other thing is it talks about a court-appointed legal guardian. What we sometimes have is you'll have a parent who signs a power of attorney. It's giving permission for someone to care for that student in the meantime. That doesn't have the same effect because the parent still retains all the legal rights and can cancel it, seen as temporary. So it would have to be a permanent guardianship. Otherwise, there's some exceptions. Important difference from what you all are used to dealing with McKinney-Vento students. For residency purposes, it's not about who you're living with so much as where is the parent. So if a student is not living with a parent, but living with someone else, but we could verify the parent is physically residing in North Carolina, they're good to go. They do not have to be physically living with them. So to begin, if someone just moves here, the biggest challenge we would have with the students that you work with are if the family moved here less than a year ago. That's going to be a challenge because, you know, the law says you've got to have retained established it and retained it for 12 months. The other thing is says you have to have the legal capacity. So today I had a college call me about a student who's 17 wanting to make an argument. Her parents are in another state, that she's moved here now this summer and that she's, you know, resident of North Carolina. Well, she's still a minor. She doesn't have the legal capacity. And here's where immigration status comes into play too. They have to have an eligible immigration status. So come back and we'll talk about that later. And then to not look at parents again, they have to show that truly they're independent. In other words, they can support the majority of their expenses on their own. In terms of financial aid, as long as it wasn't something co-signed by a parent, we'll consider that as part of that calculation. There are many separate, you know, really unusual circumstances that we sometimes see. Someone who's awarded the state or in foster care, or they're married, you know, or they are an emancipated minor, which happens at ages 16 and 17 in rare cases. In those cases, there are provisions, but these are not common. Or someone who's, well, I have one of these today, someone who apparently was orphaned, and because they were 17, they haven't appointed a formal legal guardian. So there are provisions for special things like that. There are also provisions for active duty military stationed in North Carolina and their eligible dependents. So as long as they're stationed here, if they're claiming another state as their permanent home, they can still get a waiver for in-state tuition as long as that person's stationed here. It's not about the physical presence, it's about being stationed here because they're claiming another state is permanent and they're just here temporarily. So we see a lot of those in the state, of course. So students can qualify that way. There's a lot of other special provisions. Again, if a student who's lived long-term, let's say with an aunt or a grandmother here in North Carolina and the parents live in another state, those probably have to be handled one-on-one, but there are provisions for a lot of these situations where we're split families. So coming through the RDS system, you know, we try to get that detail to assist with those special cases. Okay, come on, here we go. So the top issues we're seeing, very honestly, is here. If I had to say that for your students, 70 to 75% of the cases where they came through the system and immediately got an out of state, it's one of these issues. First of all, they have multiple accounts or they forget their login information, you know, contact the call center. The second biggest thing is they put in the wrong name, social, date of birth for themselves or parents. The system utilizes electronic means to check with state databases. So if you don't provide a correct date of birth or social, it's going to say we don't find this. So that is a huge issue. And a lot of it is actually the student's own social or date of birth. And we see many of them every day. We actually asked for it twice in the interview to try to prevent that. The next biggest issue is skipping too many questions. Maybe the student's in a hurry. Maybe it's, I don't have that in front of me, so they just kind of skip over them. RDS has to take at face value. If you don't give any information and say no to everything, that you don't have it. Maybe you just arrived. But if you say, no, I don't have, or my parents don't have a driver's license, a vehicle, a voter registration, not employed, don't pay taxes, don't have any kind of involvement with state programs like Medicaid or food stamps. I mean, if you say no to everything, the system's going to take that at face value. So that is another huge issue. A lot of students rush through it, or they enter incorrect data. And so they have, you know, rather than saving and coming back, that is a huge issue. or students trying to say, I'm really independent from their parents, but then they're either a minor, they don't meet the legal ability to do it on their own without special circumstance, or they, let's say they're 18, but they have zero income. So, and parents are in another state. I mean, that's going to be very difficult. So those are the top reasons. And most of our reconsiderations, probably 75% of them, had the student given some more information the first time through they would have gotten in-state. That's a huge issue that y'all can help with. Okay. So some tips. Again, if they don't have the information, encourage them to save where they are, and they can return to the same place they don't pick up from the beginning and come back, because otherwise they're going to create more work and have to come through again. Next is, when asking about parent or guardian information, they do not have to be living with them. If they can at least give us the parent's name, address, date of birth, I mean, we can try to do some lookups and see what we can do to do that. They don't have to be living with them. If they still get out of state, they can come back and we'll talk about how to handle that, and we'll get a little more information. The RDS system can handle a lot of complex scenarios. It's going to ask a lot of questions, and depending how you answer it, takes it to the next level. But split families, living in one state or the other, or military or immigration issues, it's built to take them to the right place. It functions much like a TurboTax type interview. Depending on how you answer the question, it's going to take you to the next module. Sometimes we get questions from counselors saying, can you give us a list of the order in which they're going to see things? No, I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of possibilities. If you say you're a U.S. citizen, you're going to bypass the immigration module. If you say you're in the military, you're going to take a totally different path. And then, sorry, y'all, finally, generally speaking, if the student is saying that their parents are in another state and they want to qualify as independent, they're probably not going to qualify before age 19 because they don't have the legal ability to start to establish their own domicile until 18, and then they have to meet that statutory 12 months of having a domicile. So that's been a legal interpretation that's been reinforced for us. So what type of information, if you're not familiar, this we're going to talk about our website, some of the resources, but it's really pretty similar to what they would need for a FAFSA. Sometimes we'll ask for a little more information about state taxes because on the state taxes, they pinpoint a date if they moved here during a year, if that's helping us to pinpoint if they met the 12 months. We need a little more information about immigration status. And let me just comment on that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I know Juan's going to address some issue, but in our guidebook, it gives a list of statuses. I just did another comprehensive review of all of them with our consulting immigration attorney in the system. Is some immigration statuses by definition, like a student on F1 or student visa, the requirement of the visa or the condition of the visa says, I'm only here temporarily and I have a permanent residence in another country. If it doesn't have a restriction like that, we tend to take a lot more. I mean, those of you who work with FAFSA know it's very limited. There's only like 4 visa types. There's a whole bunch that this state will take, so it's much broader. So the types of information out there that you can help students review this if they need to gather documentation. Okay, using the online system, so they have a primary initial consideration. Typically, for most students, they're going to get a temporary determination up front based on what they put in, but subject to validation. That was at the request of community colleges who have a lot of last-minute students. The UNC system, for example, won't pull it in until it's been finally validated. It gives them an idea up front saying, if everything validates what you're telling us, it looks like you'll be in state or it looks like you'll be out of state. Talk about this interview with skip logic. So depending on how you answer one question, it goes on to the next or skips a bunch. They get a number, which is very important for them to record. It's another frequent thing of calls. They can always log back into their account, but that number stays with them for life. They should not try to create another account. And so, for example, if they finish their college career, want to go back for graduate school, they would log back in and they keep their same number. Once the determination is made, it immediately is available for a campus to download, and it immediately goes to state grant system. I'm going to come back and talk about options in a little bit about what happens if it's not correct. If they believe it's wrong, I should be in state, they can request a reconsideration and appeal. Okay. So first of all, they would log back in, and a lot of times students tell us, by the way, this is showing, their status. It's kind of a dashboard there. It's saying, are you a resident? Yes. Are you eligible for InState Tuition? Yes. Has it been validated? No. And it explains what that means. Okay, so in other words, it usually takes a day or two to get things back. The bulk of this process is done electronically, and that was one of the advantages that people envisioned going into this, is that if you say, for example, I have a driver's license, or I'm registered to vote, or I pay taxes, it simply pings those databases and says, yes, we have a match with that person. So rather than collecting a lot of documents. There are just a small number of scenarios where we need documents. Progressively, we've been able to turn most of those requests off. Immigration, current military station in North Carolina, we would need them. And then if they have really an unusual thing about saying I have a court order saying I'm an emancipated minor or something like that. But in general, the number of students needing a document up front, they get to an appeal and they have extenuating circumstances, they can submit, more, but it's very few. It's really the minority of students. So we were trying to do that and not have to collect a lot of paper or have them transmit a lot of sensitive information. At the bottom of their dashboard, at any time a student wants to, they can log back into their account and they can see the status. And it tells them here, okay, if you disagree, click here for reconsideration appeal, and it will guide them through the next steps. Or let's say years from now, their determination's expired and they need a new one. So it guides them through that and it explains the difference. And essentially and again, more clear messages about how we receive documents no, and it's telling them, here's what we need. Here's the document still pending, here's your deadline. So this is going to give them a clear status. The big difference between a reconsideration appeal is on a reconsideration, and it gives them a checklist and helps them to choose the best option. It says, I missed a deadline, or I didn't give you enough information. I have more information I can give you. I forgot to submit a document, whatever. The reconsideration is going to actually be faster for them because then it runs it through the system again. The appeal is really meant for someone saying, I have such a unique circumstance, or I don't know what else to tell you or what else to give you, but I think it's wrong. And it's a shorter form. It may take a little longer to process because that gets handled one-on-one, but it explains the difference between those two. At the end of that process, by the way, there is a final level of appeal that would come to SCAA. And we hear very few. Last year, I think we had 17. To give you an idea of numbers, by the way, of students served is, since this system went live almost 5 years ago, there's been over 1.7 million determinations and 1.4 unique students using the system. And again, keep in mind, it's graduate students and students from out of state as well as the students who serve. This year, over 201,000 unique students so far and 243,000 determinations. So a couple of comments, and I know Juan is going to touch on some of this, but students in some unique scenarios, we get these questions frequently about DACA or undocumented students, or not, students with a non-eligible immigration status. The DACA issue comes up frequently and regularly to the legislation, as such, they have not passed anything. Federal law says, if you look at immigration website, they do not hold an immigration status. They're simply registered and have some provisions in the meantime until some decisions are made, but they do not hold a status. And as such, they're not eligible to establish a residence. It doesn't mean they're not present here. So unless a state passes specific laws, there's no eligibility for them. Same thing with undocumented students. We get a lot of, or students who we don't get as many truly undocumented as you would think, but we have a lot of students, for example, that have come to this country seeking asylum. They have registered, as has DACA students, with immigration asking for consideration. But immigration says that does not constitute a status, and they might get denied. So, and they're not eligible to establish a permanent residence. So the student must currently hold an eligible immigration status. If you have one of these students, that doesn't mean they cannot attend a college university. Certainly they can. It would just be a question of eligibility for in-state. So if you have one of those, we've built in an option, or student from out of state, if they know they're not going to qualify, they could simply, the first question is, do you claim, are you trying to claim residency? If they say no, they get their RCN number and they're done. But they must currently hold an eligible status. I will tell you that unfortunately there aren't a lot of options. I only know of two very, very limited and unusual scenarios where it is possible for a student who themselves is not documented or classified as DACA to get in-state tuition, but it's very unique circumstances. Let's see. Say anything else about that, the immigration? Oh, importantly, we ask about the immigration status of the student. We do not ask about the immigration status of a parent. I'll say that again because people have said that, you know, we're trying to find parents or something. No, we are looking for the student. We've had some cases where a parent may have status. They have brought their son or daughter here, but the son or daughter does not. The student themselves must hold an eligible status. So if we have a student who's a US citizen and whose parents do not have documentation, or the way the interview is worded, by the way, it doesn't try to get them to identify the specifics of their scenario. It says, my parents do not have or do not wish to share this information. We've had some parents saying, I don't want to share my social security number, and they're US citizens. So it doesn't single out, you know, the reason. But if that, what we can do in those cases is, you know, for the US citizen student, you know, or any other like that where the parents don't, we have to resort, this is probably going to be an appeal, some hard copy documentation. We try to be flexible of, if they have a ITIN, a tax number, that is very helpful because sometimes there's taxes. We can ping and get that. You know, we look at other things. Sometimes there'll be a vehicle registration or a lease. So we try to work with them as we can, but that one probably would have to be handled manually unless they have a TIN number. Students with an unstable address history, there's, and this is where they get a checklist of some of the qualifiers for your McKinney-Vento Act. And by the way, I get asked about this a lot. Attorneys looked at it and said, there's really, other than helping them qualify perhaps for independence on the FAFSA, there is no provision or extension to college to give them automatic in-state pass. That having been said, you know, there's enough exceptions out there. If they have been here, we do our best and we try to find something in there. So it's not an automatic process. So when the students get to the interview and it's asking for parents, you know, again, you got to change your mindset. We need to know, is there a living parent here? Whether or not they're living with them. If we can find a way to verify it, they'd be in. If it's not their parent they're living with, it's probably going to get kicked out. But students who have an unstable history, you know, whether it's, you know, classic notions of homelessness, or maybe they've gotten bounced around from relative to relative, what will often happen in these cases, it's one of the few cases where the student will not get a determination up front, and it'll tell them this is under review, and RDS tries to reach out to them by phone or email and find out a little more of their situation and kind of coach them through the process. So the person who, well, I lived with, you know, with my aunt for 2 years and then my grandmother for a year and an uncle for a year, we try to piece that together and work with them. That's something that's not going to be so easy in a going through an interview, automated way. Okay. So finally, just a couple of things about recent changes is we have a new official RDS guidebook. So if there's some older information out there, it's available on our public website. There have been a few recent changes, but honestly, they have to do with exceptions. Periodically, there are changes. For example, there's federal legislation called the Veterans Choice Act. So veteran gets discharged, service member gets discharged from the military and decides, I want to move to North Carolina. It's never been my home, or I was there briefly for training. They move here. Like anyone else, they have to establish the 12 months duration required by law. However, there are some provisions that many of them have a military educational benefit for the service member, and if the service member assigns them to a spouse or dependent. If that person has an eligible benefit, and it's possible you have someone like this, especially if they just got here within the last year, then the college will work with them, and if the VA certifies they have the benefit, they get an override. They're still non-residents, but they would get eligibility for in-state tuition. There were some changes to that law. It used to be a narrow window of 3 years after discharge. That provision was taken away, and then in recent years they've added additional types of financial assistance they'll consider. I made some revisions to the section on immigration, updating some visa eligibility. We added several. Some of them came off because they're expired and or no longer eligible. Some additional forms. And let's see. There are a couple of other exceptions that are, again, handled at the campus level. The community college system has several of students in unusual circumstances, and our interview tries to pick up on a student who's not passing who might be in that scenario. And if they apply to a community college, it sends a flag to the college. And those are detailed online in the guidebook about what they are, but they're managed by the community college. The UNC has a provision, for example, in 2 cases of a special campus exception. If it's a full-time UNC employee, they and their household can be eligible for 1 year during that establishing duration for a waiver, or if a student's on 100% full scholarship. So there are some things managed. A lot of the changes had to do with those scenarios. And that's the bulk of the changes. Let's see here, almost done. Come on. All right, going the wrong way. So assistance is available. So on our website, if you haven't explored it, please do. You'll see the guidebook, but there's a lot of resources and one-pagers, many of them geared toward counselors, but some toward students and parents, particularly some of those like immigration issues. There are a lot of helpful hints of how to walk through, explain the situation. Many of them are translated into Spanish. I'll let Juanes talk about. There's a helpline. If they want to give a third-party release, they can do it. Those are the standard hours, but when we get busy, for example, in August, they had extended hours for the fall term, and we'll again. And then there's an email. So this is designed to help students going through the interview or the process and they're not sure what to do, or if you're not sure how to help a student, they're available to assist with that process. So I'm going to stop there and see what we got.
Thank you so much, Jean. That's been wonderful. We have a few questions about the PowerPoint. It's going to be emailed out to those who have registered in the next 24 hours. So you will get a copy of the PowerPoint shortly. Any questions that came through, we were able to respond to. We usually will announce questions verbally if they seem to be good for the whole group, but so far they have been ones we've been able to handle written. And so I'll thank Jean for providing all of that wonderful information. If you all have more questions as we go through, please feel free to send them over in the questions area. We're here to help answer those. And in the meantime, I am going to pass this over to Juanes to provide some information on Spanish services. And Juanes, you should be able to control the mouse at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gina. We appreciate the information. Hi, everybody. I bring you greetings from Spanish Services. My colleague Juana and I serve in the Spanish Services team. I wanted to just mention to you guys a little bit about what we do. We are the connector with Latinx and Hispanic students and provide tools and resources to empower them to thrive in their post-secondary educational endeavors. So we are really excited that we are able to do that. We can't do it alone. We depend on our friends and our colleagues just like yourself. So thank you so much for our partnership and our continued partnership serving our students. One of the things that my colleague Juan and I always mention is trust. And when we're working with these processes, trust becomes a really important piece of that puzzle. So you guys know better your students, and so we're hoping that as you continue to develop those relationships with your students, that you continue to be a partner for them and a support for them. And then, like Jean said, we are here to support you in any way, shape, or form. So I wanted to really connect RDS and Spanish services. We work with those policies that my colleague Jean already mentioned, and they're always changing. So I wanted to just provide you guys some of those tools that we use in a daily basis that maybe can be helpful for you as you're working with our Latinx and Hispanic students. Let's see if I'm able to move this. Okay. So my colleague Jean mentioned that there are some eligible immigration statuses or statuses that have the capacity to receive in-state tuition. So this is a piece of information that we use daily. I know that some of these are new, and so they're going to be being uploaded into the RDS system. And so I encourage all of you guys to print this and have it in your office at any time, so you can see exactly what kind of statuses are eligible or can receive or have that capacity to receive in-state tuition. And so it's very clear and very detailed, and it will tell you very clearly the type of information that it needs. So I love working with this form, and I encourage you guys to also print it whenever you go into the RDS resources. So that's a big piece of what we do, just remembering that who has the capacity to receive in-state tuition. My colleague Jean also talked to you about undocumented and documented students and just trying to help them through those processes. When we're working with our DACA and undocumented students, as Jean mentioned, they are not able to, they don't have the capacity to be in North Carolina resident. So the process for them, it goes a little bit quicker. Whenever you guys are working with them and they have a question on whether or not they're claiming to be North Carolina resident, then they answer no, and that process or that interview process kind of finished for them. They will receive a confirmation number, and that's the confirmation number that the student will need to add into the college applications. I do wanted to mention that the students in North Carolina are able to go to college. So there can be a lot of rumors and misinformation in the community, but just know that there's not a law that prevents undocumented and DACA students from attending post-secondary institutions. And I think that that's important for us to clarify today, that they still are able to do. However, they are not going to be receiving some of those benefits that we have here in North Carolina in terms of tuition, and then also those in-state subsidies or that money from the state. The second piece that that we work with is families with diversity of documentation, or you may have heard about mixed status families. This is the case when a student could be an eligible citizen, a permanent resident, or other non-citizen. However, their parents don't share the same status. So when we're working with this kind of families, the RDS system does provide them the opportunity to submit different type of documentation. So here in the screen, you will see that when it comes to the security number, is going to give the option to the parent to submit a tax identification number. And this number is usually really, really helpful when we're working with communities that don't have documentation, because they're able to use this number for tax purposes. So if you're working with a family and they don't know what an IT number is, then usually connect them to an organization or connect them to the IRS, where they can complete Form W-7. And that form allows them to receive a IT number, an IT number that will use that for tax purposes, and also can be used here in the RDS documentation. And if for some reason the family or the parent don't have one, or they do not wish to provide one, they also have the opportunity to select that particular box there. And what happens is the initial consideration for the student will be a non-resident, but the student will have the opportunity to either be selected for reconsideration if the student has any type of information to add in the RDS interview, or if the student doesn't have anything else to add, then the student can do an appeal. And that would also give them the opportunity to be considered as the next step. I also wanted to talk about some of the ways that we can think about maximizing their time in high school while minimizing the cost. Remember that our students are completing RDS as one of those milestones, and Jean even mentioned number one step on milestones to be able to go to college. So we are encouraging our students to earn college credits, whether that is through an early college, whether that is through a dual enrollment, whether that is through taking AP classes or even CLEP exams. That can be a great way for our students to be able to save some money and also be ahead of in terms of college credits. Also, there's different college programs across the state that allow students to participate. And so we're really encouraging for you to take a look at some of those promised college programs within your communities and see what are the requirements. We always talk to our students about scholarships, whether they are local, specifically to your community, whether they're regional, institutional, state, and national. Our students really enjoy and benefit by having different options. So I encourage all our students to not just apply for those big national scholarships, but also to take a look at those smaller local scholarships, because they can really assist the student regardless of their immigration. My colleague Jean also mentioned a lot of the programs at the institutional level, and one of those are the sponsorship opportunities that our community college system offers. They are opportunities in terms of business, nonprofit, and there's different kinds. So if you are you have to follow the policies of the individual schools in order to get some of those sponsorships, but just know that they are available for students. Also, one of the things that people don't necessarily think about is distance education programming. So there's a lot of schools where they're bringing their programs off campus, whether that is through a online presence or an off-campus presence. And a lot of them, the tuition is a lot cheaper than if the student would go to campus. A lot of our students do benefit by the convenience of being close to home. So distance learning has become a growing part of the options that we have for our students. And then of course they can save some money by being close home, and also like some of those tuition benefits that they get being off campus, right? They don't have necessarily to pay for all those expensive fees that are attached to going to college. The North Carolina Promise program that 3 institutions here in the state are part of, Western Carolina, Elizabeth City State University, and UNC Pembroke, are great options for students, especially because they have those provisions providing in-state tuition, discounted in-state tuition, and also a discounted out-of-state tuition. So those are great options for some of our students. Also thinking about private schools. We have some very generous private schools that are making education affordable for our students. And so there are many private schools that are DACA friendly or undocumented friendly. And so it's part of the admission process, just trying to work with them and figure out what the rules are and what their expectations are. And I put others because I know with so many great people and counselors and trusted influencers that you guys have creative ways on working with students. So if you want to connect and share some other ways that we can assist our students to maximize the time in high school and minimizing costs, they're always welcome. Dr. Query?
Thank you, Juanes. That was all wonderful information. I think it's really helpful for all of the education professionals that are on today as you go into the month of October and you think about how you want to bring residency into the month, not only having the information that you need to hopefully help the students and answer their questions, but also to figure out how you want to handle helping your students get through the residency process during the month of October or whenever it is you might decide to do it. If you all have questions, I encourage you to send them over in the Q&A function. I thank Jean Ritter and Juanes Ramirez for providing all of this wonderful information today. I also want to make sure that everyone knows about the last two programs we have coming up this week as part of the CTC Education Professionals Week. Tomorrow afternoon, we will have a session specifically on College Application Week, where we will be discussing admissions applications from CFNC, transcripts, and fee waivers. And so we'll have different presenters for that tomorrow. And then Thursday morning, we will have our final program of this week that's titled College Access and COVID-19. We're going to talk a little bit about keeping students on track, hopefully, for post-secondary education. We're going to talk about self-care. We will have the Director of Financial Aid from UNCW on, and he's going to talk a little bit about financial aid, as that is, in general, a stressor for students in the college access process, let alone during COVID. So we're going to talk a little bit about financial aid and just some ways we can help students through that as well. If you're interested in either one of these, you can go to cfnc.org/events to register for those. We did have a few questions about the handouts today. Normally we have it in a handout section that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen, but we missed that today. So we're going to send it to attendees either after today's program or tomorrow. So you should have a copy of the PowerPoint. And just as a reminder, you will get a follow-up email in 24 hours with your CEU information there. And I also wanted to have a screen as we finish up today that once again provides all of the contact information for your speakers this afternoon. So you have email addresses. If you are thinking, well, I've got some specific questions and perhaps isn't good for today, but you'd like to follow up with Jean or Juanes or myself, you're welcome to do so. And we appreciate you all being here today. Anyone on today, any of the folks, the presenters or anyone else, is there anything that you wanted to add before we close? All right, well, hopefully you have all your questions answered. For all of the speakers today, if you all wouldn't mind checking your questions panel on the right-hand side of the screen, just to make sure you haven't missed any questions that were assigned to you. And otherwise, we appreciate you joining this afternoon, and hopefully we will see you tomorrow afternoon for the session on College Application Week. So thank you all so much for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your day.